It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Puris coming to you from Baltimore. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Thursday tried to explain why his office intervened in a criminal prosecution involving SNC-Lavalin that his former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould was pursuing.
What has become clear through the various testimonies is that over the past months, there was an erosion of trust between my office and specifically my former principal secretary and the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General. The context is a tough one, with potential job losses in the thousands. These are the types of situations that make governing a challenge. The matter of the loss of thousands of jobs, the concern around pensioners, the concerns around the Canadian economy are very real things that every government needs to preoccupy itself with, separate from, in addition to, any electoral concerns.
On to discuss all of this with me is Dimitri Lascaris and Yves Engler. Dimitri is a lawyer and journalist. Dimitri is a leading class action lawyer, I should say he was. And before leaving his practice, Dimitri pursued a $1 billion securities fraud class action case against SNC-Lavalin. And Yves Engler is a Canadian commentator and author. His most recent book is Left, Right, Marching to the Beat of Imperial Canada. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Germany.
Thank you.
All right, let's, before we jump into all of this, let's listen to the former Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, at her hearing on February 27th, making it very clear what the Prime Minister had said to her.
It started in September. She says the first person to cross the line was the Prime Minister.
At that point, the Prime Minister jumped in, stressing that there is an election in Quebec and that, quote, I am an MP in Quebec, the member for Papineau.
It was the September 17th meeting the Prime Minister has referenced before. Trudeau says he used it to reassure Wilson-Raybould that she would make the final call on SNC-Lavalin. She views it differently.
I was quite taken aback. My response, and I vividly remember this as well, was to ask the Prime Minister a direct question while looking him in the eye. I asked, quote, are you politically interfering with my role, my decision as the Attorney General? I would strongly advise against it, end quote. The Prime Minister said, no, 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 we just need to find a solution.
All right, Dimitri, let me have you respond to Prime Minister Trudeau's defense of all of this and, of course, the Justice Minister Raybould's allegations here.
Well, I don't think that Justin Trudeau, in that opening clip that you played, has contradicted what Ms. Raybould-Wilson said. What he said was, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but, it is legitimate for a government to be concerned about jobs and pensioners. And these are the key words. He then said, in addition to electoral concerns. So it seems as though, and he has not, as far as I know, just point blank denied that he and his aides did not raise electoral concerns in their discussions, in his discussions and their discussions with the former Justice Minister. I think it's becoming increasingly apparent when you add this all up that in fact that's precisely what they did. They did raise electoral concerns, and they're trying to deflect attention away from that by talking about jobs. This has been the mantra of the Liberal government ever since this scandal erupted. And by the way, it's a mantra that Liberal and Conservative governments have used for many years to pursue neoliberal policies. It's not a genuine concern about jobs. They have other interests, not ones that are particularly important to the Canadian public that they want to pursue, including their own electoral ambitions. But let's talk for a second about this whole notion that jobs are at stake. In Canada, SNC-Lavalin employs approximately 9,000 people. Now, that is across the nation a drop in the bucket for a job market that consists of tens of millions of people. But moreover, these public contracts, let's just bear in mind a common sense proposition. If SNC-Lavalin is not awarded the public contract, somebody else is going to get that contract. The jobs are just going to end up being transferred from SNC-Lavalin to somebody else, some other corporation, some other business entity. They're not going to evaporate into thin air. The contract is still going to be tendered out. There's still going to be work done. There's still going to be people who will need to be employed in order to get the work done. And moreover, the idea that a company, which as Elizabeth May pointed out in the hearing yesterday, that has $15 billion of back orders, is going to eliminate thousands of jobs if it is, for a period of 10 years, barred from public contracts, is implausible to say the least. So I think that this whole mantra that we're hearing about, this is all about job protection and pensioners, is nothing but a smokescreen for the fact that ultimately what the Liberals were trying to do was to maximize their electoral prospects, particularly in Quebec, where there are some very powerful people associated with SNC-Lavalin who are supporters of the Liberal Party.
All right, Yves, let me get your reaction to all of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question of power. SNC-Lavalin is a very powerful corporation. It's not a question of jobs. It's a question of power and maybe a question of profits. SNC-Lavalin has shown itself, the fact that it was able to win this deferred prosecution agreement after a multi-year lobbying campaign shows that it has incredible influence within Ottawa. But that's something that's been pretty clear to anybody paying attention to SNC-Lavalin for in recent years. It's been it's one of the most influential companies with regards to Canadian foreign policy. It's been tied into Canadian aid money, the Canadian military, going back more than half a century. It has the support of Canadian diplomats abroad. It has the support of Canadian Commercial Corporation abroad, Export Development Canada, Canadian Trade Commission. It's continued to have that support despite being found guilty of corruption abroad and having allegations of it being corrupt, having paid bribes in about 15 different countries. And so this, to me, what this whole scandal shows is just the incredible power that corporate Canada has within Ottawa, and SNC specifically. This is a very powerful corporation in determining Canada's whole relationship to the rest of the world.
All right, let's listen to Trudeau being questioned after his press conference this morning, one by the Globe and Mail, and the other questioner is not yet clear to us who that was, but let's listen to those two clips back to back.
Did your aides say, it's all right to have a good justice policy, but we have to get elected? Did your aides talk about Quebec politics and your re-election in the context of a criminal prosecution?
There were detailed conversations on a broad range of things that were discussed and laid bare in the various testimonies that we heard over the past weeks. What I can tell you is my team and everyone in this government always remains focused on how we make sure that we're protecting jobs and building a better future for Canadians.
Minister Wilson-Raybould says that she told you on September 17th that she had made her decision, and after that you told your staff to continue to work on the file. Why would you ask them to continue to work on it if she told you she'd already made up her mind?
Part of the terms of the DPA indicates that decision can be taken by the Attorney General up until the very last minute of a trial. So we considered that she was still open to hearing different arguments and different approaches on what her decision could be. As we now learned through this testimony, that was not the case. But like I said, there was an erosion of trust, a lack of communications to me and to my office about her state of mind on this, and that is certainly something that I'm having to reflect on as a leader, and that I'm looking forward to improving on as we go forward.
All right, Dimitri, tell us what you thought of those two clips.
Oh, the first thing I would say, Sharmini, is that clearly what we've heard from Justin Trudeau again in this scandal is a non-denial denial. He was presented with an opportunity to explicitly confirm that neither he nor his staff raised electoral concerns in their conversations, their communications with the former Justice Minister and her Chief of Staff. He declined the opportunity, and this is consistent with what he said in the first clip you played, where he mentioned electoral concerns as one of a litany of items that he said were the kinds of things that have to preoccupy a government. So I think when you look at the totality of the evidence, we can safely infer that electoral concerns were very likely raised in conversations with the former justice minister and perhaps with her chief of staff as well. The other thing I want to address is this idea, and this is not something simply which Justin Trudeau asserted in the clip you played, but it's also something that his former principal secretary, Gerald Butts, raised in his testimony, this notion that the justice minister under the statute, the former justice minister, had the freedom, legally speaking, to change her mind right up until a verdict was entered in the criminal proceeding against SNC-Lavalin. Well, that's really a red herring. The issue here is not whether she was legally entitled to change her mind. The issue here is whether she had, in fact, made up her mind. And her testimony is that she told the Prime Minister this herself in September of 2018, that she was done. She had considered the issue. She had decided that this was not an appropriate case for this extraordinarily corrupt company to receive a deferred prosecution agreement. And despite having communicated that to people within the highest levels of the government, she continued for a period of months to be subjected to intense pressure to give this company basically a slap on the wrist in what is quite probably the worst corporate corruption scandal in Canadian history.
Right. And Yves, what is riveting about all of this is how much SNC-Lavalin can flex its muscles all the way to the Prime Minister's office. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it seems pretty clear to me that the Liberal government, Trudeau government, was willing to go a long way to defend SNC-Lavalin. I think, you know, the fact they brought in the deferred prosecution agreement suggests that, and clearly the pressure they were putting on the former Attorney General suggests that. I think that it is important to look at this scandal in a broader light. Okay, SNC-Lavalin is accused of paying bribes in Libya and is in the process of a court battle that's about to begin, prosecution, and it is able to force or to pressure the Liberal government to bring in a way around the worst possible outcome for them of that prosecution, which is to have this deferred prosecution agreement, which would allow them to continue receiving government contracts. But if you look at the past few years of SNC-Lavalin and all these stories of its corruption abroad coming out, it's amazing how few individuals have had any consequence. Okay, so the board of SNC-Lavalin, amidst all this corruption, the chairman of the board, Gwyn Morgan, the founder of Encana, he continued to write a column in the Report on Business section of the Globe Mail in the years after all this corruption scandal coming out of SNC-Lavalin bribing officials around the world. Another board member, Hugh Segal, another member of the Order of Canada, continued to be a member of the Order of Canada and then was given the Order of Ontario. A number of other board members. One then goes from SNC board to become the head of Canadian National Railway. So the story of SNC-Lavalin, they're paying bribes around the world and how they continue to have all this power over politicians. There's almost no one held accountable. It's just an indication of how the power of corporations and how the whole political system is oriented around benefiting corporations. And no matter what these companies are found to be engaged in, both domestically, I mean, SNC-Lavalin here in Quebec is paying bribes as well, or internationally, they continue to receive support of the whole political world, of the media world as well. And I think that's really that's the big picture that we need to keep in mind when looking at this scandal.
All right, thank you for that, Yves. Dimitri, much of this is being framed in the Canadian media as to whether the Liberals are going to survive this scandal. And apparently the polls are showing a 9% decline in terms of Trudeau's leadership and favorability. So do you think this is going to stick?
Well, I think to a degree it's going to depend. It's going to depend on two factors. It's going to depend on what additional information comes out and how other people within the cabinet respond to the information that has emerged and will emerge in the future. He's lost two high-profile members of the cabinet, both of whom are women. He's staked much of his legitimacy, his appeal on the claim that he is a feminist prime minister. But two, as I say, high-profile women ministers, female ministers in the cabinet have resigned, having cited a loss of confidence. So if anybody else were to depart the cabinet at this stage, I think that would potentially be a devastating blow to Justin Trudeau. And so he needs to ensure that the ones who remain are united behind him. And you know, I think also if we get additional testimony, which undermines what we've heard thus far, and if the media begins to draw attention to some very pertinent facts which are being lost in sort of the personality, the emphasis on personalities and the whole narrative about whether this is a he says, she says sorts of thing, then the public might become sufficiently moved by this to make his electoral prospects grim, to say the least. And one factor which is being, not, I think, discussed enough in the media in this country, in the mainstream media, is the legislation itself. The legislation itself contains a section which says that if a corporation is committed of an offense under the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act, then the prosecutor must not consider the national economic interest. How you can reconcile that provision of the statute, which was promulgated under Justin Trudeau's government, with the claim that this was all motivated by a concern for jobs, is beyond me. I think if the public begins to focus on how flawed the explanation is and how inconsistent it appears to be with the very legislation that they are relying upon, then I think that this will be potentially devastating to the Liberals' electoral prospects.
All right. I'll go to Yves for the final word here. Do you think Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are going to survive this scandal?
Well, it's no doubt it's hurt them, it's damaged them. I do think that much of their electoral prospects are based around winning Quebec and the weakness of the NDP in Quebec. So it is definitely possible that the Liberals will sweep Quebec, and I don't think that this scandal has as much traction in Quebec as it does elsewhere, because the truth is that SNC-Lavalin has a whole history of being a symbol of Francophone Quebecers having success business-wise at a time for a lot of period of recent history where Francophone Quebecers were marginalized and oppressed. So it won't have as much traction in Quebec, but there's no doubt it's hurt Trudeau's brand. But it's unfortunately it's the at the current moment, it looks like the main beneficiary of that will be an even more pro-corporate Conservative Party, and I don't think the situation would have been all that much different if the Conservative Party would be in power now, because I think if you look at SNC-Lavalin, they're very good at having relationships with Conservative politicians as well. But I think there's no doubt that this is going to hurt Justin Trudeau, or has hurt Justin Trudeau.
All right. And to the point that you made, Dimitri, earlier about how this might damage the relations with the Indigenous Aboriginal community in Canada, as well as the two feminist ministers resigning over this. Justin Trudeau is quite aware of that, because in the press conference, he actually said that, following this press conference, he is visiting an Indigenous community, and that the government is very interested in resolving issues with the Indigenous people in Canada. And then also he made it a point to say that he's back in Toronto on March 8th for International Women's Day, where he'll be meeting with a number of young women to hear their concerns. And so I guess we'll leave it there for now. Dimitri, Yves, I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.